Days like this always make me feel so nostalgic. After a cold, grueling winter filled with gray skies and blankets of snow that turn your skin as pale as a ghost, you can't help but get this huge rush of happiness when you finally get to feel a warm spring breeze as the sun comes out to shine. I remember growing up as a little kid, this would always be my favorite time of year when I could finally go outside again, play a bunch of sports with all my friends as summer vacation quickly approached. And of course, after enjoying the designated amount of fresh air my parents forced me to get, I would rush inside to do one thing and one thing only. A short while ago, I released a video titled, What Happened to MMOs? In the video, we discussed the golden age of the MMO RPG, where a ton of games in the genre got incredibly popular in the late 90s and early 2000s, but then after a number of years and after the market was flooded with a ton of MMO clones that all tried to cash in on the hype, players eventually got tired of the genre and moved on to the next big thing. But there was one big question in that story that we never really answered. Why the hell did RuneScape survive? I mean, throughout those years, you had so many MMOs all trying to outdo each other to find success, with each new release having bigger stories, better graphics, and cooler gameplay than the last. Why did a little browser-based game that looks like this survive for 15 years and counting now? It's easy to brush it off as some sort of nostalgia, like RuneScape was one of the first MMOs to ever come out, making it the first MMO a lot of people got to experience. Maybe a portion of the player base only enjoys reliving the good old days on the 2007 servers, but that can't be the only reason. No other old MMO has come this far. Asheron's Call, Dark Age of Camelot, there were a number of others that came out before RuneScape and nobody's still playing any of those. No, I think RuneScape has some really incredible elements to its gameplay that's held it up after all these years and kept the game alive. Game design that nobody else has tried to copy or take influence from since, hey, it's only RuneScape, right? I mean, what could this goofy little game have to offer the world? Well, a lot actually, the first of which being a game mechanic unique to RuneScape that makes its world come alive more so than any MMO I've ever seen, the examine mechanic. Most of the time when you play an MMO, it will be modeled after World of Warcraft in many ways, where you have this gigantic world you can explore, but nothing ever really feels alive in it. The NPCs are all just checkpoints where you get quests or buy items, and anything that's actually a part of the world itself is typically something you can't interact with. You don't sit down in the chairs that are littered across rooms, you don't ever put stuff on tables or use boxes for storage. There are a few exceptions for certain things that are profession related or quest related, but because those are the only objects you ever interact with, that just makes them stick out like a sore thumb. In the end, all of this added together typically makes the world feel really lifeless. Sure, it can feel busy and fun as hell in its prime if you have players running around all over the place, but if that isn't the case, then the world will just feel like an empty shell. RuneScape combats this with a really interesting idea. Make everything interactable. I mean literally everything, whether it's useful or not. The game will acknowledge every object in the world. Every tree on the planet can be cut down with a proper woodcutting level. Every table, every bed, and every picture hung up on a wall can be right-clicked and examined to get a little line of text describing them to you. Some of these examine texts are incredibly simple. Sometimes they'll have a little reference to something, and other times they'll just be a goofy joke. It isn't something that you would think makes much of a difference, but it really makes the world come alive. So many MMOs just end up feeling like an empty, hollow shell due to hardly ever recognizing things the player doesn't need to worry about. Like you just end up being railroaded through a theme park of various attractions where you go through each area chronologically to level up whatever you have to do and eventually reach the end game. But RuneScape never did that. RuneScape treats the world like a world, and a world is going to have plenty of things that aren't relevant to you, but just because they aren't relevant doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to stop and literally smell the roses. This also helps teach players to think for themselves and makes quests a lot more interesting and difficult. For instance, if you're on a quest where you're currently tasked with finding some way to bring this big stolen sacred rock back to a village, that rock is just treated like every other object in the game. It only has an examine text. The solution to this puzzle is never something as obvious as just click on it and your character will do whatever it is you need to do. No, you have to use your wits a little bit. Think like, what if I just use a pickaxe on this rock and bring a little piece of it back? Does that count? The second thing RuneScape did to really distinguish itself from other MMOs out there was keeping a solid level of realism and believability. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I hate it when I'm playing an MMO that tells me, you are the chosen one, the one that destiny sent, the only one that can save the world from destruction. No, that's not even remotely true. There's 20 million other adventurers who are all also the chosen one, just like me, running around killing cows to level up. It's pretty hard to suspend my disbelief and get lost in a world of adventure when you start off telling me something that's so blatantly wrong and counterintuitive to the idea of an MMO. RuneScape, on the other hand, though, never did that. When you come across quests in RuneScape, you're never touted as a great hero that destiny sent. You're an overeager adventurer running around begging for quests, where typically NPCs will respond by saying, "Hey, yeah, I got a quest for you. Why don't you help me set up for this dinner party?" That doesn't mean the quest can't take a cool and creative turn, but because they all start off grounded in reality, it makes them feel all the more believable and real. RuneScape still gave you a world of fantasy, a world of ogres and goblins and distant lands, but it did a much better job of building a believable world. It tries to help you forget that you're playing a game at all and just lets you get immersed in the experience. You're rarely influenced in any way. You aren't told a story of what you're supposed to be feeling. You aren't given a class in the character creation that tells you what you can and cannot do. You aren't even told how to get started with half the skills out there. You just set off stumbling around looking for adventure. Above all else, though, if there's any strength that RuneScape had over the years that's kept it alive compared to all the other MMOs competing against each other, it's gotta be the fact that it was incredibly simple. Of course it's simplistic. The entire idea behind the whole game was an MMO so simple it could run through a browser, something everyone could play. Naturally, the combat and the skills are gonna be weirdly basic, but because they were so basic and because the developers had to work around so many technical constraints, that gave the game a really weird, cool little flavor that distinguished it from the pack. Because of its simplicity, the game was forced to use other elements in its gameplay to draw players in. Like, how do you make PvP combat that looks like this interesting? Well, how about players lose almost every item they're carrying on death? Have perfect levels of progression for leveling skills, where leveling can get really hard and tedious towards higher levels, but you get incredibly useful rewards and impressive skills and achievements to show off. A lot of other MMOs at the time were too busy trying to be WoW killers, to just copy the exact same formula that World of Warcraft had and leech off of its success, but RuneScape never tried to do that. Rather than just being another not as good version of the WoW formula, RuneScape ended up being something entirely different and ended up giving an experience unlike any other MMO out there. I struggled for a really long time to figure out what I should title this video. I thought at first maybe something to do with RuneScape and game design, or maybe why did RuneScape survive, but I ultimately ended up settling on the Unappreciated MMO because in the grand scheme of things, that's what RuneScape has always felt like. To outsiders looking in, it was the casual game, the free-to-play one, the one that was so easy to run you could play it through Internet Explorer, but it has a lot of great elements to its gameplay that's kept a player base of thousands for more than a decade now. That dismissive attitude that many people had towards it is probably why we haven't seen RuneScape's elements copied or implemented elsewhere, which is a real shame, I think, since it does have a lot that it can offer the world of video games. It sure as hell swallowed up a ton of my childhood and gave me a bunch of fond memories. A while after I quit the game in 2009, I always found myself looking back thinking, maybe the only reason I thought the game was so good was I was young, right? I mean, look at it. These fond memories, they have to be from some sort of nostalgia. But after revisiting it on the old school servers once again, I have to say, it's a damn fine game and maybe the most unappreciated MMO.